and welcome to another Scots Way podcast. And today I'm joined by Ruarri Joseph, who is the singer-songwriter with William the Conqueror, but now is also an author with his debut novel, also called William the Conqueror. And I'm delighted to be joined by Ruarri now. Hello, Ruarri.
How you doing? Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure, absolute pleasure. Before we talk about the novel, can you tell us about William the Conqueror, the band, and how you came to make music?
Sure. Well, I was a solo artist going under my own name for 8 years or so. I put out 4 or 5 records and hit a point where I felt pretty disconnected from what I was doing. It had become something of a job, I suppose, as opposed to why I what I got into music for as a kid, which was just to make music. And I was very grateful for that, to be able to make a career out of it. But there was definitely a disconnect there. I sort of have this memory of seeing a poster of myself, and it was my name with my face, and yet I didn't really know who it was. It was just this sort of odd feeling that I'd lost track of. I think I said this to someone once, that I think I heard my younger self kind of sniggering at me, for what I'd become. I'd become this kind of safe singer-songwriter thing, kind of by accident, but it just didn't match the dream I had of myself as a kid. I was just well into grunge, and those ludicrous dreams of becoming like a a rock legend or whatever. They just slipped by, and I don't know, yeah, a disconnect there. So I was looking to do something else, thinking maybe it was as simple as having I mean, by the way, being a singer-songwriter called Ruarri Joseph, it's not that easy to remember. It's certainly not that easy to say unless you go north of Carlisle. So I don't know. There was just lots of things in there that I thought maybe just a simple name change or going under a moniker would work. And around about the same time, I remember having this sort of vision. I don't know if it was a dream or just I don't know, like a daydream or something. I had a vision of a boy walking through a woods, looking over his shoulder, and the name William the Conqueror just really bright above it. And I don't know, the image just kind of struck me as something that was worth investigating. So around that time, I just decided to take the name William the Conqueror. It seemed equal parts confident and sort of a bit idiotic, which reminded me of my younger self, entirely.
It's really interesting you say that, because that idea of looking back at your younger self seems to be in the novel as well. Was that
Yeah.
something that inspired that?
Yeah, so it all kind of bled out from that same place. I mean, one of the first things I started doing was performing like off the radar in pubs under the name William the Conqueror, just to try out a few ideas I had that didn't really fit into the solo thing I was doing. And that just became a fun thing to do. But at the same time, I thought I'd try writing a screenplay to go along, to sort of flesh out this image that I had in my head, because it seemed like the opening image of a movie or something. And having like studied film at university and wanting to get into script writing, I knew the format and thought that might be an easy way to kind of flesh it out. So I started writing this story, and then realizing that it was obviously loosely based on my own childhood, and started working my way through that. But the script wasn't really coming together, and I didn't know how to write a book. But songwriting was a thing that I'd always done. So the stories started to come out in song form first, I suppose, and hence, sacking Ruarri Joseph and deciding to actually put a record together as William the Conqueror. Yeah.
So it allowed you almost to start again musically.
Yeah, it was a massive reset. Yeah. And I think it seemed I wasn't being like vain and thinking, oh, I've had such an interesting life, I should really write this down. It was more that I'd become a dad so young. I was like 17 when I became a stepdad, and 19 when I became a dad. And so I jumped from childhood into adulthood like overnight. So there's just no time to even sort of reflect or analyze my own childhood in a way that I suppose a lot of people do throughout their 20s, before becoming a dad or a parent of some kind, or committing. It was only at the point at which my kids sort of reached the age that I was when I left home, about 16, 17, that I started to, just wonder who on earth I was when I was 16, 17. So it just seemed like this fictional character, you know, hence that why the name change sort of made sense, really, just to sort of view it all through the prism of a made up character, made it more interesting to try and navigate this kind of jumble of memories that I had that didn't seem to be in lots of vibrant images, but there was no order to it. There was no linear narrative. So
Yeah.
I was just plucking out the images, you know, and which suited the songwriting more than a book, you know.
I was going to say that you can do that with songs, you know, the
Yeah,
snapshots,
yeah,
or I suppose you could do it with short stories or something like that. But a
yeah.
novel's a different undertaking. So when did you decide that this is what you were going to do?
When the script, so I hit a wall with the script because I realized that the relationship between the character of William and his dad relied so heavily on the music of Bob Dylan that if I wrote that into the script, I'd never be able to afford to make it. so
That's a
so I had
brilliant.
like I tried deviating. I tried like changing it so that the dad wasn't into Bob Dylan. He was into like obscure jazz and blues records from the 20s, so I could maybe, but it didn't work. It was so reliant on that relationship. So then I thought, well, you know, the story was kind of fleshing out and appearing to me more and more. So I did sit down and try and write a sort of straightforward novel, like Once Upon a Time There Was a Boy Called William, and just go through chronologically and see how far I got. I got pretty far. I got like maybe 2/3, 3/4 of the way through. But it just wasn't me. I wasn't writing naturally. I was trying to emulate, you know, what I thought were the sort of great writers. Like if you had to, George Saunders said a thing where he said he made the mistake of thinking that good writing meant for hard reading. And I realized that I'd sort of made that mistake as well, because I was trying to be like Herman Hesse, just way overly poetic and trying to sort of wind my way through the narrative by, I don't know, this overly romantic or overly melodramatic version of things. So I did that, and then I printed it out thinking, you know, maybe I'll just leave it in a drawer or something and one day it'll come in handy. And I got it out eventually, but 6 months later or something, thinking I'd go through it and just and mark some mistakes and correct a couple of things here and there. And as soon as I started reading it, I absolutely hated it because it was so not coming from me.
Right.
But because I was bored and had nothing to do, I had a red pen, I started marking it as if I was like a disgruntled college lecturer that was just having a nervous breakdown because his students were so hopeless. So just writing these sort of acerbic, offensive things all over this student's work, telling him that he wasn't being real enough or that he wasn't being honest, and this is bollocks, and you know, this is so poetic, I'm going to be sick. And all of a sudden everything started to come to life, you know, like having this kind of secondary voice have an opinion about the romantic vision that this person was trying to have about their life, instead of like telling it how it really was, you know. That's where the idea for the novel eventually came from, was making it about a dialogue between two different perspectives on the same childhood. Yeah.
So there is a conversation that goes on. You have got two kind of, I suppose, two narrative voices really going through it. So that just came about through, you know, you marking your own homework almost.
Basically, yeah. I mean, it's, you know, like the initial idea was, oh, I could just, maybe if I write a really bad novel, but then show my self-awareness by having these notes written all over it, maybe that could be, but you couldn't string that out for long enough. It was, you know, it would just become boring. So yeah, it was trying to then figure out what the voice could be exactly, and what the relationship would be, because that seemed like the interesting way to tell the story, I think. Because I think I realized as well that, yeah, there's a tendency to romanticize or look through sort of rose tinted glasses at your childhood sometimes, and actually things are just a lot more banal or um pathetic or whatever, you know, whatever the things were. And that seemed really interesting to me. Yeah.
So because you've got this kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, accusatory almost, you know, or someone who's trying to get to the truth of what actually went on, that kind
Yeah.
of pushes against, as you say, the romanticized ideal.
Yeah. Yeah, there's like a dispute going on about which parts of his life matter and which ones don't. And I mean, I know that like the linear structure of the sort of story arc, if you like, is very simple. You know, it's a boy who's 18, who decides that he's at a junction and um, and needs to try and figure out how on earth he got there by going through his life step by step, right from his birth. But it's less about that than it is about the relationship between the two voices, because they're coming from the same person, these two voices. It's a conversation within his own head. And yeah, to me the book was much more about that, really, I suppose, and trying to argue or dispute or discourage certain memories from coming back, because one voice wants a certain narrative and the other one wants another one, and it all fell together quite quickly once I'd found that device, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting device, because it seems to me it's like the voices that I think we all have, saying, well, either you're not good enough, or you're not up to this, or that kind of that side of things, the kind of negativity, almost like something on your shoulder saying.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I mean, I was aware of that, and I was sort of quite keen that it wasn't just because that was the first place to go. It was like, oh, it's like a devil on the shoulder, but it's not supposed to be that. It's I don't want to give it away, but part of the discovery of the book is trying to figure out what exactly the voice's motives are and why he might be
absolutely
trying to channel William in a certain direction and whatnot.
And you mentioned that it's autobiographical in part, and without going into detail, I mean, is it really autobiographical? Is it quite close to? Yes,
it's not factual, but it's very truthful to the character, I suppose. So some parts are absolutely directly lifted, and then other parts are completely fabricated. Other times I might just like lend certain things to another character in order to portray something, or modify it slightly, or certainly like the big things I omitted because I wanted to make sure there was some distance between the real me and the character of William. So like, I have an older brother, but William is an only child. William was born in 1981. I was born in 1982. Just like little things like that, so that there's a definite distance. But yeah, you're absolutely drawing on my own experiences, for sure. Yeah. Heightening in some senses, and other times using the opportunity to maybe go down the road that I didn't quite take, or that I'd only imagined. That was quite fun.
I think it's interesting to look back and almost on those sliding doors moments in your youth when you think, well, if I'd done that kind of thing, that might have gone and that goes for the relationships, I think, in the novel as well. I mean, all the relationships you get, there's a kind of real truth in those, in that you've got people who one day seem to act one way and then another day are completely different. You start to think, well, is that down to me, or is that my reflecting on them? There's all of these questions going on.
100%. Yeah, because memory is a weird thing. I realized quite early on, because I had a couple of conversations with like my mum and my brother, for example, just to ask them, like, do you remember this or whatever? But it sort of sucked the life out of it for me, because it was more fun to have these unreliable memories and see if you could make them fit, rather than ironing out all of the creases of the things that seemed odd or didn't seem to match. It seemed much more of it sort of suited my writing style a bit more, I suppose, coming from a songwriting background, where it's much more abstract, and you're much more trying to piece things that don't necessarily fit together if you were to hand it into an English professor, but but they kind of fit visually, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely does. And I think you've talked a couple of times about the importance of vision. You say you had this William the Conqueror and the boy in the forest and all of that stuff. And I should say that for those looking at the video, here's the cover of the book, and it's got some fantastic illustrations on it. And were they important for that reason?
No, definitely. Yeah. I mean, for one thing, it was just, another way of being able to get the character of William out, I suppose, because as a young, that's his kind of retreat, I suppose, when his parents are getting divorced and his dad's illness is kind of taking over and he's moving to the other side of the world. And all these big things are happening to him, where he's getting taken out of one place and put into another. The kind of consistency is his imagination and his creativity. which is kind of lifted from my own childhood, I suppose. Like he could take a guitar everywhere with him. He could take a notebook. He could always draw. He could always write. He could always use his imagination. That was like the consistent thread throughout. So yeah, to have the illustrations was a really nice way of being able to just enhance that idea, I suppose, that he was a very visual person. Yeah.
And there's also that sense of how much of his memories can you believe as well, because he goes into these kind of, not fantasy exactly, but he does escape into creativity.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, big time. And I suppose in some ways, like a memory is only in your imagination, whether it's real or not. So what's the difference between a memory and a daydream, that you once had? It's quite hard to decipher them, I suppose. So I had a lot of fun with that. Yeah.
And these aren't your illustrations, are they? Someone else's?
No, they're by a lady called Liz Anelli, who she was living in Australia. A friend of mine introduced me to her. She mostly does children's books, but I don't know, there was just like this kind of dark edge to them, which was really appealing. So yeah, and the way she did it. So during the first lockdown, just to keep myself busy, I recorded the audio book of I put it out as a podcast, but the way she did the illustrations was to listen to the audio book and just scribble as if in a notebook, as if she was William, just kind of making notes about the things that were going on around her. So that was a really fun process, just kind of getting back these pages and pages of these mad off the cuff illustrations and piecing them together, and that was really cool. I really enjoyed that. It's definitely something I'd like to do with the next book as well. Is like, I like illustrations, and maybe it's because I've got a short attention span, or maybe it's because of the current climate or something like that, where there's this sort of slight feeling that the novel in its old form, just words, needs to evolve a little if it's going to try and survive, I suppose, the short attention span of modern culture, by having more illustrations and different ways of being able to display the narrative instead of just prose.
Well, it worked beautifully in this case because, as you say, it's interesting to hear that she's a children's illustrator, because they are really dark. I mean, they really set the tone almost of William's thought processes. You've got, I think the first one, or one of the first ones, is almost just black.
Oh yes, yeah. The skyscraper on the phone book. Yeah. They're cool, aren't they? I love them. Yeah. And there's tons more as well. There's like maybe a plan to try and put together a book of all of the illustrations and tie it in with it. Like a picture book version of the story, of the whole story, would be cool.
Oh well, that would be. Another thing about the novel which jumps out is it's packed with musical references and other references as well. It's these really set the kind of time and place, or places. Was that a fun part to do? Because I think it was something I would do. If writing the novel is difficult, maybe finding the references that fit might be more fun.
Yeah, it was good to navigate the timeline using pop culture and whatnot. The films that are coming out, the films that William was watching, and the music he was listening to. Like the grunge scene was quite a big thing, in the early 90s for myself and for William. But yeah, it was important to me because I think it was more to do with the idea of William's kind of disconnect from his encounters with religion early on in his life, like a kind of church-going family, and then moving to New Zealand and living in a very, very church, or it was like more churches than whatever pubs in the town I lived in New Zealand. So often being surrounded by the idea of religion, not necessarily clicking with it, but something in his head, understanding that there is a need to try and find faith in something somehow, or find a way of being able to steer your moral compass in the right direction. And for myself, and I think for William, hopefully it was more coming from things like pop culture, from music, from art, from films, and so like that's the device I kind of used with regards to Bob Dylan, because my dad, for real, is 100% obsessed with Bob Dylan, like to the point where I haven't had a conversation with him in the last 25 years that hasn't steered its way onto Bob Dylan somehow. And for William, it was kind of fun because he didn't get much out of his dad. He was this kind of mysterious figure in his study, kind of drinking and being a alcoholic microbiologist, whatever. The connection was Bob Dylan, and there was something in the education of the lyrics of Bob Dylan. Like for example, there's somewhere in the book where William, when he moves to New Zealand and he sort of realizes that he's only ever seen one person with dark skin before, because he grew up in Cornwall, this kind of microclimate of whiteness, and realizes how lucky he was to have the music of Bob Dylan to kind of introduce him to, Hattie Carroll and Emmett Till and Hurricane and Oxford Town, and then that bleed out into blues music and Muddy Waters, and so the importance of music and films was that's how William was able to see that there was a world outside of his own kind of where he spends most of his time under his bed with his imagination, kind of knowing that there's this great big world out there that if only he could get through school, become an adult, he could be in it, and he thinks he does. He thinks he fully understands it because of the things he consumes. But yeah, he's pretty naive, I think. As I said, equal parts confident and stupid.
That sounds like nearly everyone's childhood. I think that's
there you go. Well, we're going for the mass market. Yeah.
But I think better than most, I think you absolutely capture that, a sense of how important the music and the films and all the kind of the books, everything that you consume at that age can be, sometimes for bad as well as good. They can color your worldview and you think that's absolutely what I think. But they can also give you a moral sense, moral compass that perhaps you maybe don't get elsewhere.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I know that's what I was like. I mean, it's slightly different now, I've maybe got more of an understanding of the idea of faith than I used to have, but certainly as a kid, that going down any kind of religious route just seemed insane to me. But because I was kind of getting the same things without realizing it from culture, I suppose.
Yeah. The Church of Scotland was just scary. There was no
yeah.
That was definitely what was going on. So you've got a lot of the music at the back kind of set out. I won't spoil anyone's names by mentioning any of them, but that's another thing about the novel, doing something new with it, something else with it, is having almost, if you wanted to, the soundtrack to it as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's interesting because it's got, like, as I say, that's another difference between me and William, is that William's musical tastes are much more kind of zeroed in. They're much more contained, because I wanted it to reflect more the sort of behavior patterns of his dad and just how similar they were, despite the lack of interactions and what happened, what does or doesn't happen to his dad kind of early on in the book. That they had a similar nature in that they would fixate on, a few things rather than have like a broad spectrum of lots and lots of different things. So it's Bob Dylan, it's Kurt Cobain, it's Eddie Vedder, it's Neil Young. There's smatterings of other things, but essentially that kind of obsessive behavior, I think, I wanted to get that more across than being more honest about, I was quite into like everything when I was young, but Williams just kind of zeroed in on these few things and makes the mistake of thinking that, well, if he's obsessed about the greats, then that's all he needs to know. He doesn't need to know about all the little things going on. He just needs to know about the greats. I think that's kind of Williams' mistake. Like he goes for a job interview when he eventually gets to London as a 18-year-old. He goes for a job in a record shop, kind of thinking that he's going to be like Quentin Tarantino famously worked in a video store and was just a geek, and that's how he's so good at making films. William has this idea that he's going to be the sort of same, but in the musical world, just be this guy that knows everything about music. But he goes for this interview in a record shop, and the premise is very simple. They read out an album title, and all William has to do is say who made it, and he hasn't got a fucking clue. And that was real. That was based on an absolute, almost as verbatim as I could have possibly made it, was that experience of suddenly it dawning on me that I didn't have a clue about music at all. You know, I was just because of that limited focus. You know, there's a I didn't quite get it. This was a joke I added, but the idea that he thought Rumours was made by Led Zeppelin, and that he'd never really heard of Fleetwood Mac. You know, yeah, it was fun. It was a fun bit.
That's, I mean, again, that's the kind of naivety of youth thinking that, yeah, you know it all, and then you suddenly,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
get into the adult
But,
world in inverted commas, and you realize you really don't.
totally, yeah. Well, that's what I mean. That's why the name William the Conqueror fits so well, because it's so brash and forward, and yet it's just so ridiculous. It's just, you know, it's like he hasn't twigged that might be jarring to some people, that there might be, is there not someone else called William the Conqueror? No, I'm William the Conqueror. I think you'll find, you know, it's yeah.
And it seems that throughout the novel, it's cathartic for William to look back on his childhood and kind of discover and discuss even, you know, what went on and why he's got to this place. Was it the same for yourself writing it?
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, because it was that leap before, or not really a leap, just like going from childhood into adulthood in my life, trying to pinpoint a place where I must have made some kind of moral decision about which direction I should be going in, and I was trying to kind of zero in on that. And that's where the setup for the book, obviously, it opens in London when he's he's living in this squat in a high rise, staring out of the window, coming down off, you know, whatever substances he's put inside himself. You know, I do remember something very similar with myself. And yeah, I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was that steered me in the right direction, but there was certainly a point in my life where I could have easily gone down, you know, the wrong route. I think, like, just being unaware at the time, but now knowing that, you know, addiction, and from talking about my dad's alcoholism and that obsessive behavior and all of those traits can quite easily send you down the wrong path, you know, naively or unintentionally. But I just feel like I got really, really lucky. Something about how my character had been built, which must have only been through what my imagination and the records I was listening to and the books and the films I was reading and watching. Something just steered me in the right way. I don't know. Like, I don't necessarily believe in a higher power, but something steered me in the right direction, and here I am. But
even that idea that the music you listen to, or the books you read, or the films you watched, whatever, that weird mixture, that it took you in a right direction. It's a lovely, it's a really nice thought. I think that, yeah, you chose wisely, that your taste,
yeah,
it's almost the definition of taste.
yeah, maybe that's interesting. Yeah. It was an interesting idea to me that somebody could be, you know, obsessed with Kurt Cobain, like completely on a pedestal, just an absolute hero, and then also have a father figure in their life who is also, like, they don't see much of, but is also a hero, you know, and worshipped and on a pedestal, and then Kurt Cobain shoots himself in the head, and somehow that could almost be seen as cool, you know, the sort of weirdness around that whole idea of wow, he's so mysterious and he's so cool for killing himself, and then your own parent attempting suicide, and that being this really jarring thing of like, well, now what do I think? Because on the one hand it's kind of cool, and on the other hand I can see that it really isn't, and all this kind of trauma that's kind of sitting in now. And that was an idea I was kind of exploring, certainly in the early parts of the book, is how do you reconcile that, you know, when your heroes make mistakes and show themselves to be human, and do things that you don't necessarily agree with, or, you know, how do you reconcile that? It's yeah, and that stuff comes out in the songs as well. There's a song called Pedestals, which is all about that on the first album. And yeah,
I mean, that's it, isn't it? When kind of real life comes crashing in, especially if you've, you know, almost cocooned your life with other things, whether it's music or whatever, and then, you know, often, you know, you reading something or listening to something or watching something is there's a level of removal before the kind of real life sometimes can crash.
yeah, I know what you mean.
Take on it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So the book itself is it's published by Blue Raincoat Books.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's your music publisher, isn't it? That's
It
your
is.
label,
Yeah,
Blue
yeah, yeah.
Raincoat. Is this the first book they've done?
I believe it is. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. I mean, I didn't, no one asked me to write the book. This was just a thing that I was kind of working on between the hours of midnight and 4 o'clock in the morning for several years, or not several, but, you know, however many years. And I didn't really tell anyone about it. You know, maybe I've discussed it with my band or told them I was doing it, but oh yeah, you know, I've heard plenty of people say I'm going to write a novel, you know, but so it was just kind of there in the background, and at a certain point it just seemed to manifest into this place where it fit with the records in some way, because like the albums, so we've made 3 albums so far as William the Conqueror, and the first one was the child, and the second one was the father, and the third one was the mother. So they were this trilogy that kind of tell the story of William's / my childhood in song form. And then the book was just like added another dimension to it, because I suppose in if you read the book and listen to the music, you'll see where certain songs come from, even like direct lyrics come from certain places. And yeah, they got quite excited about the idea of tying it all up into one big bundle, you know, so you have this trilogy of albums plus the book, and it all fits together in a package. So it's cool. I mean, hats off to them for you know, taking on something new and trying something different. Yeah, it's awesome.
I
Very
think
lucky.
it's great, because it's interesting, I think, when there's new publishers or people are publishing stuff that maybe don't usually, because you always get something new from it, you know.
Yeah.
You thought about how to you know, put it out there, you know. As you say, you've got the music in the book, you've got the illustrations, which might not have happened with a more traditional publisher. They might have
Yeah,
gone,
maybe not. Yeah, maybe not. I mean, maybe yeah, it wouldn't have been published at all. I don't know. You know, I'm a sort of unknown writer, and it's not, like I say, written as in a normal novel format. I don't know. I don't know much about the publishing industry. I'm trying to learn as I go, and yeah, it seems interesting to me. But yeah, like I say, I feel pretty lucky to have met Blue Raincoat, and for them to have so much faith in me. It's awesome. I'm very lucky. Yeah.
and I think you mentioned this earlier, but I was going to ask, now that you've done the first one, is there going to be another novel?
Yes.
But you can't say anything about it.
um, no, I absolutely can. It's like so the first novel finishes around, because it's told from the point of view of William, who is an 18-year-old, 18 about to be 19 in the novel. So kind of like the first 20 years of his life. I'm now 40, so there's this other 20 years of my life that I've had, and I was wrestling with the idea of thinking, oh, I could just write a sequel, just kind of carry this on, but that didn't seem right. So I've just finished it, by the way, and I won't say too much about it, other than that if the first a way of thinking about it would be that if the first book is called William the Conqueror and it's by Ruarri Joseph, you could think about the second book as being called Ruarri Joseph by William the Conqueror. So it's more playing with the kind of idea of identity, you know, or dissonance between creator and their creation, if you know what I mean, like a kind of split, but expanding on the split personality kind of stuff from the first book, but doing it in a different way, working backwards towards 20 from 40 rather than chronologically. It's quite mad and it's quite meta, but it's been a lot of fun. You know, I decided it took me about 5 years to write the first one, all in all, including the failed script and the failed book, and in between making the albums. But 5 years is too long to take to write a novel. If you're going to actually be a writer, 5 years is too long. That's no good. So I set myself the goal of writing a novel in a year, and I'm very pleased to say I managed that, and I'm pretty happy with it too. It's very different to the first book, but I shouldn't really be talking about it, should I?
Well, again, this is one of those things that I said we can take out if you really wanted
Oh
to.
no, it's not like that. It's not like that. It's just but what's weird is like everything that when it exists in your head, the kind of idea is perfect, and the minute you start trying to talk about it and articulate, like when you wake up from a dream that seemed really vivid, you try and explain it to someone, and it's like the thing just dissolves on contact with air. So whenever I start talking about new ideas or things that I haven't spoken to too many people about, that's the feeling you're going through. It's just like you're kind of losing touch of it, and you're just trying to gather it all back in and cram it back into my head and just make sure it's all in place and figure out exactly how I'm going to articulate it before I attempt it. It's maybe not a very good way to go, but that's how I do it. That's how I do things.
And it does sound as well that there's still conversations going on if you're switching the role of
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah. There's a definite like divide between Ruarri and William. You know, I mean, like the most clear cut version is that when like I stand on stage and sing, I feel like I'm, you know, embodying William, I suppose, to some extent. Or if I'm writing on my own out in the shed, anything where I'm like completely on my own but being creative and trying to get into that some sort of zone that no one else is included in, that's when it's William. And then the rest of the time on Ruarri Joseph. And then it gets confusing sometimes, especially when you're writing a book about those kinds of things, because everything in the real world starts to infiltrate your thoughts, and you could be having a conversation with somebody and then realize deep into it that you haven't really been paying attention to the conversation. You've been thinking about, I wonder if I can use this in my book. You know, I wonder if there's any way I can incorporate this. And so then you know, it's kind of time to write. I need to finish this book and try and reassemble my brain again. Yeah.
So that's. Have you got a publication date for that? Or is that too far?
Oh no, not at the moment. No, because we released the third album in the trilogy, but now we've got the fourth album as the band ready to record. So we're going to try and get that recorded this year and hopefully out. But the book will sit with that. So it won't be one book and three albums. It'll be one book and one album that will kind of go together. They might even have the same name, just so there's a much more direct contact between them. So there's like less explanation to try and have to do. But that's just been the nature of the project. It's like, it was more like the whole point of inventing William at the start was that everything that happened to him had to be organic. It wasn't like there was this big vision or anything. It was just like roll along and see what happens. And certain points where you gather tons of momentum and you're doing loads of music and then a big drop off in that. And so you touch base with the book, and it's just kind of reached this point where now you can see the package, but it wasn't necessarily planned that way. So for the second one, I'm going to make a more concerted effort to make sure I tie it in from the beginning. Man, I'm waffling.
Well, no, it's interesting because for a moment when I asked you when it might be coming out, I forgot you were also a musician for a moment.
Yeah,
You've got albums and you've got tours, and I think the new album or the most recent album, Maverick Thinker, you're going to be touring that event. I mean, finally, when gigs are allowed again.
Yeah, we've kind of been touring it. So like we decided to put it out in 2020, so it did come out. Oh no, it may even been 2021. Maybe it came out the beginning of 2021. So we have put the album out, and every show that we've done, which is like a couple of little tours, a sort of handful of festivals. The tour we were just on recently, we had to cancel the last few dates because the band got COVID, which was a bummer. But it, that's essentially been about promoting, if you like, Maverick Thinker. But then I say that, but it's not like we're some corporate machine that's out there plugging this one thing. The whole of the William thing is important. So even to the point where we talk about the book on stage, and I might read little extracts and play songs from the first album, the second album. It's not like we're just out there plugging the third one or anything. Yeah. It's a universe. We're trying to sell a universe,
William the Conqueror universe. And are you happier? Are you more content? Would the younger you be happier with William the Conqueror rather than where you had been with Ruarri Joseph?
I think in terms of the work, yeah, for sure. I think that was what it was about, was trying to appease my younger self to some extent. Even from the simple thing of, and also mirroring the obviously I'm not Bob Dylan, but moving from acoustic to electric, something in that, and just being a bit louder, not being afraid to sing about the things that are really going on in my head, instead of trying to, I think as a singer-songwriter, because I had a loyal fan base, but quite a small one, but it meant that when it came to making a record that I was going to go out and promote, I had to consider that. I had to think, okay, well, I've got to keep them on side. I'd better make something that sounds like this or sounds like that. And that's where I started to lose touch with it, because I realized I wasn't really doing it from myself, or sounds a bit vain to say I wasn't doing it for myself, as if it's like it's only about me. It's not. I just think, like, if you're going to be an artist of any kind, it has to come from the right place. And if what you're doing is trying to pander to an audience, even if they are a lovely bunch of loyal people that help you maintain a living, it's not really art anymore. It's more of craft. It's more of like technique, or there's something else to it. So yeah, William would be delighted with the products that we've made, I suppose. But I don't know. I look sort of at a point now where I look back on Ruarri Joseph and think, well, maybe his music wasn't as good, but he was a lot more mellow. He was a lot more chilled as a person. You know, he wasn't like pulling his hair out and hadn't turned himself into a complete and utter introvert by, just going out to his shed between the hours of 12 and 4 in the morning, trying to create something out of his own childhood. Yeah, it's been maddening at points, for sure. So there's still a little, but that's what the second book is about. The second book is about trying to reconcile that. You create this thing that helps you in one respect come to terms with things, build a career, all that sort of stuff. But what is it taking away from? And the obvious thing that it takes away from is the family, a sense of normality, of kind of, because it's more touring, it's more work, it's more creation, it's more selfishness, it's all of those things. And so yeah, the second book deals with that reconciliation, I suppose. Well, identity crisis, all that shit.
I was going to say, I mean, in the book and in your William the Conqueror music, you are digging into things which are pretty deep. So, there will be, a reaction from that, but you would hope at the end that, you get out the other side of it.
Oh, yeah. No, I think I'll be all right. Yeah. And also what you hope is that that what you're creating is coming from a place that's honest enough that people will be able to make their own interpretations and take what they want from it, rather than it being spoon-fed to them. Hey, this is about this, and this is what you're supposed to get. It's so the idea is you make the thing, you present it, people either dig it or they don't, and that's what you have to live with. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I think people will, because I think it's a fantastic novel. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, man. That really means a lot. Thank you. That's great.
And it's also been great to discover new music as well through it.
Yeah. So you came to the book first?
Yeah, I came to the book
first. Interesting. Because there's not many of you. I suppose there's less of you than there are the other way around,
Oh, yeah.
Because we've been going as a band for like 5 years now. And so our fan base have kind of picked up the book already knowing the music, kind of looking for the clues and stuff. But it's always interesting to talk to someone that's come book first and music second. That is interesting. Yeah.
I've really been enjoying both.
Awesome.
Well, thanks very much for taking the time to have a chat, Ruarri.
Thank you, man. I hope it was all right.
It was great. Good. And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.